Good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Freeston. I'm Director of Quality Improvement at the Early Years Alliance, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's webinar for the Strong Early Years London programme, commissioned by the Mayor of London, when we are having a discussion about the perennial issue of effective staff recruitment and retention. I'm joined this evening, I'm delighted to be joined by June O'Sullivan, Chief Executive of the London Early Years Foundation, and her colleague, Michelle Samuels, experienced in HR matters. Say hello, please, ladies.
Oh, hi. And Michelle is our apprentice manager and has a very interesting take on that, which is quite important in our recruitment and retention line.
It will be. Apprenticeships is one of our favourite topics at the Strong
it's one
Early
of
Years.
mine too, Michael. One of mine too, don't worry.
We get into the complex nature of it in due course. It's my pleasure to welcome everybody who's joined us today. And what I would say from the outset, please, is this is very much a discussion opportunity. Please don't think that the three of us are going to give you all of the answers for the issue and the challenges that around staff recruitment and retention, because otherwise we would have done it and it would not be an issue of concern. It is a real challenge. I think, June, Michelle, you'd probably say one of the greatest challenges we have, that and issues around parental demand coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I would agree.
So, what we want to try and get from people today are their views, what any experiences they've had, their current situations around recruiting to vacancies or retaining staff, but also to share some of the strong work that I know London Early Years Foundation have done, and hopefully draw from other people about how we promote the career opportunities within early years to maintain recruitment and retention. Just by way of introduction, June, as Chief Executive of London Early Years Foundation, also chairs the London Region Ofsted Big Conversation. So some of you may have come across June in those situations in the past. And it's through those range of forums that she's an all-round champion for the early years sector, both in the capital and nationally. So what I wanted to just do is I'm going to work through a couple of issues about the Strong Early Years programme itself, but also then focus on the challenges we face. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Strong Early Years programme is a 10-month initiative funded by the Mayor of London, started in March of this year, running until in May of this year, running until March of next year. And it builds on some research, which I'll mention today, that the Alliance and CEDA did on behalf of the Mayor in terms of the challenges facing the sector. It is not being wholly delivered by the Alliance. It is a partnership across the 32 London boroughs and a range of contributory organisations, London Early Years Foundation being one of them for this particular session. There are a range of business topics that we are covering across webinars, virtual classroom sessions that we refer to as Business Connect, and also partnership co-produced sessions with each local authority, as well as one-to-one consultancy and individualized training. But they all sort of fit into those headings that you can see on the slide there. There are in fact 9 of them. Childminding is not a topic in its sense, it's just a reminder for us to make sure that we always give consideration to presenting these range of topics from the perspective of childminders as well, to make sure that they're engaged with the programme. I won't say any more about the process at the moment. Everybody will get copies of these slides tomorrow as we circulate them around the day after any webinar. And as I said at the beginning, this session will be recorded and available ultimately on the Business Hub website that we are developing with our partners at the London Business Hub. But at the moment, to house them somewhere, they're on the Alliance's YouTube page, and I will give you information about that at the end. So what we're aiming to cover in this session. We're going to outline the workforce challenges facing early years providers in London. And importantly, it is important for us for you to share your experiences, because this program is a learning session for us, as well as hopefully for you, to get a greater sense for how we create how we create effective support for practitioners going forward. And also, it gives us an overview of some of the initiatives and the apprenticeships that Michelle has mentioned earlier on that can have a positive impact on workforce capacity and development. My task is to act as moderator for the questions and the discussion. So if people are able to write into the chat box, I will try and keep one eye on that screen and one eye on that screen while I'm speaking. I had a question from, sorry, I can't see the name with my glass on, Nikiru. Please, what is the access for the Ofsted meetings you mentioned? June, can I ask you to mention that when we talk through your sessions? All right, she's done it already. See, that's how efficient we want people to be. I have to say from the outset, colleagues, please, we won't, I'd like to think, spend much time discussing pay and conditions, because let's all hold our hands up. One of the biggest factors influencing recruitment and retention, we all know it's there. It's several elephants in the room, pay and conditions. Yes, we need to acknowledge that, but in a sense, there's only so much we can say about pay and conditions in this discussion. It's more around recognizing the circumstances we face in terms of chronic underfunding for our sector. What is it that we're able to do to make the careers, the profession attractive to people, to make them stay and become next year's managers, the future managers, future chief executives of the London Early Years Foundation. June, there we go.
Oh, I think that's Michelle.
There we go. Job's taken. There we go. Thank you. Right. I'll just spend a couple of slides just talking about the challenges we face. And these are just data that I've taken from sessions that I've been involved in, reports that I had to hand. First one is an ongoing survey that was undertaken by CEDA on a regular basis. This was one of the thematic reports they did in 2019. At that time, and these are national figures, this one, 29% of providers were recruiting to a total of 14,700 vacancies, which is about 5% of the entire workforce. 78% of those had at least one hard to fill vacancy. And that was the respondents themselves saying it was hard to fill. And London, the South East and the Midlands were particular hotspots for hard to fill vacancies. So those averages were even higher for providers in London, the South East and the Midlands. Staff turnover is about 15% across the piece. And from the research I did just on a Google search, that's pretty much in line with across various sector industries. But I think what's telling is 18% of providers have turnover over 26% in the early years sector. Providers identified pay, benefits, and a desire to work closer to home as key drivers. Staff highlight limited progression, 65% of respondents said that, lack of recognition, 59%, poor communication, and negative impact on home life. And I think, June, you might want to pick up on this a bit later, that what employers say are the challenges and the issues aren't necessarily the same thing as what their staff are saying. And that might be something that we look at when we consider that from a LEAF perspective in due course. So, in the research that we did last year with CEDA, 23% of respondents identified staff recruitment as an issue. An increase in staff costs was cited by 50% of people. So that issue that I've mentioned earlier on in terms of pay and conditions. And 68% responded that inadequate funding rates were a challenge. So you can imagine, whilst recruitment and retention is high, it's nowhere near as high as an issue as far as practitioners and managers are concerned as staff costs and funding rates. And just finally, the most recent Ndna workforce survey, again, is 2019. I was speaking to colleagues over at Ndna, and they're planning to do a 2021 version in the next few weeks, but it's not out yet. 81% of providers find it harder to recruit level 3 staff, 40% for graduates, and 34% for level 2. And they identified that staff leaving the sector are mainly heading to retail, with salaries and policy changes the main drivers for people to leave. Just as an aside, I was at a session when colleagues in Ndna were releasing these findings, and they identified that 55% of practitioners were considering actively leaving the sector, not just changing jobs, but leaving the sector. And it made me lean across to a colleague I was sitting with, and I said, well, why on earth are 45% staying? Because we just had a session on how poor pay in recruitment was, etc. So, and I say that flippantly, but in a sense, when we start to look at some of the suggestions later on in today's session, we do need to actively consider what are the positive points that make people want to stay as early years practitioners.
Michael?
So, yes, June, please.
Could you go back 2 slides there? I'm just trying to connect with the data. So
yep.
That one, yes. So is this in before lockdown, during lockdown, or after lockdown? You know, 2020, where in the year was that?
Sorry, this was the research that we did with CEDA that led directly to this program being created. So this was in the autumn of last year. But remember, the whole reason for the research was, how do we help the sector recover from the pandemic? Yes. The expectation was we would have been out of it by or moving towards the tail of it last August. How little we knew, really, because indeed. It was then that the Delta variant started to kick in, and we are where we are now. So these figures were a point in time when the expectation was things were going to start improving.
And this is very London, isn't it? This is only London.
This is absolutely London.
Yeah.
And also, as part of this year's programme, the Strong Early Years programme, CEDA are doing tracking surveys on a quarterly basis. So we will refresh those figures as we go forward. And that is currently part of the survey that is taking place at the moment. Okay.
And again, before we move on to that, for some clarity, did you get any sense of the turnover rates across the piece?
No, we didn't ask that, but I mean, it is something that we can pick up in due course, because the issue was in terms of vacancies themselves rather than people moving between session settings or into different roles. So we didn't specifically ask that.
Right, great, thank you.
No trouble at all. Oh, okay. Sorry, I've jumped through all of this. So, colleagues, please, that's the challenge we face. I'm addressing this particularly to participants because June and Michelle will be able to talk from a LEAF perspective in due course. I suppose the question is that a situation you recognise? Are you currently struggling to fill roles? Do you have vacancies, or is everything hunky-dory in your part of London? And also, if you've had any successes in recruiting into vacancies at the moment that you feel would be appropriate to share with colleagues. Just think as you're typing, and I'd like people to share with us any of those circumstances they face. And whilst you're doing that, I'm grateful to June and Michelle for sharing with us some of the activities that they've been doing at LEAF to try and address those challenges. June, over to you.
Do you want to go back one slide? I just want to set a context for people.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So before we talk about things we're trying to do, I just wanted to set the context for people, because first of all, I just want to be clear, we do not have the answers. All we're doing is trying to figure it out. And the issue of recruitment started really in 2016 with bad policies by our government, and has never got better as a consequence. And now it's compounded by other things. So I think we have to understand that this is a problem we've got that's quite entrenched, and actually, so if it was easy, we'd all have solved it. The early years sector is a pretty creative bunch, and we would have found a way around it. So that's the first thing I want to say. So we will tell you, and we'll be honest about what we've got right and what we've got wrong. And one of the things Michelle will talk about is what we've got right, which is about apprentices. But that is the first thing. The second thing is, when I asked Michael about turnover is quite critical. And it's something we're tracking really carefully at the moment, because what we found is that sometimes we don't pay enough attention to keeping our staff. We put all our efforts into recruiting them. We're obsessive actually in recruiting them. And then we don't really track it as well as we could do. And then we notice that they're going, and we think, well, we've put all that effort into getting them, and now we're not keeping them. So one of the things we will talk about today is ways of keeping what you've got, So I think Michael's point a while ago, which is like, if 55% are going, and what are you doing? Why would you, what's happening with the other 45? The other 45, we've got to make stay and make them really solid.
Just a couple of points before we move on. Ndna said it's been a total nightmare recruiting this year compared to last summer. That's interesting in terms of, and also I haven't read Christine's. Here we go. 2 staff members retiring and have difficulty recruiting, particularly for a full-time position.
Yeah.
We're a term time setting. The feedback from potential employers is due to salary. On a positive, we have a staff member who has signed up to do a level 3 due to full funding for the course. Absolutely. Is that the National Skills Qualification funding, the government initiative to try and support people who don't have a full level 3 up to date? That might be it. Michelle has said, having trouble finding experienced, dedicated, that's an interesting point of word, practitioners for our setting. Less of an issue finding apprentices, but we need the experienced staff to train up the apprentice. That's a fair point. And Christine has said, yes, it is the National Skills Qualification. I'm delighted that it's coming through to you. One thing, just back to the 45%, that comment about who stays. Elaine says it's the worst it's ever been, with 2 exclamation marks. We'll see how many exclamation marks we get up to by the end of today's session. I made that comment to Jenny Johnson, who some of you may know. She used to be chief executive of Kids Aloud in terms of why do they stay. And she said, from her person who does Michelle's role, sort of in recruitment, training and apprentice, she said, when people come for an interview, you can tell within 10 minutes of that discussion, really, whether they're going to stay or not. She says, I can't quantify it, but they know just in terms of that notion of how they presented themselves in terms of enthusiasm, dedication, what they spoke about. She feels pretty confident that even before they've joined at the interview stage, they have a pretty good idea of whether that person's going to stay. And that's what we need to work out is how do we distill that essence and spread it across the sector, really? What makes a first-rate practitioner? Do you want me to move on, June?
Yeah, so as Michael moved on, just one interesting observation we found last year was, and I think one of the people in the chat box said the same thing. Last summer, we were starting to find it a bit easy to recruit. And one of the reasons we did was because a lot of staff left their employers because they felt that they weren't cared for. They felt that they didn't really care about them. They didn't make any additional efforts to make them feel safe during COVID. And I guess loyalty was one of the factors. This year, it's more mixed for us, so I can quite see, that the point changing. But let's start with what we've done here. So one of the things, and I guess every one of you can do this, is to tell your story better. I call it total reward. And quite often what happens is people fixate only on what you pay staff. But actually, we did quite a lot of research. And what we found was that you can tell the story that they have a journey with you, that there's a promotional opportunity with you, that there's training and development with you, that you're going to let them go to places to attend conferences and do stuff, that there is a route in. They stay for longer. So that's the first thing. And we never tell that story. We always get fixated on salaries or whatever. Now, I'm not saying salaries aren't important. Of course they are. But I think there's also, for different aged people, a different opportunity. So we created a level 1, which Michelle will talk a bit more about in a minute. But level 1 was that the sense that no matter that at every point there was something for you, rather than you come in and you jump into a level 2. And everybody has to do a level 1, whether you're coming in as the finance director or whether you're coming in as an apprentice. Level 1 is about welcome to the organization. It's about what does it mean to work in a childcare organization. It means it's about what are those kind of preparation things that you need, that important to you, the tone of voice, the way you approach things, the professionalism. It's only a short course and we got it accredited by Cash, but it means that there's nothing wasted from the time you get in. Now, we've been very focused on all of this, and we have now gone right up to honours degree with a LEAF module, which will also turn into a CPD program at some point. But for me, what was the important thing was that there was always something possible for everyone. And that kind of gave us a culture of, I think, engagement, and a culture of loyalty, and a culture of commitment, because whether you're a chef, you could have a chef award. If you're interested in something, you could do something for it. And you might sit out there going, that's all right for you with your 42 nurseries, but actually it doesn't matter if it's 1 nursery or 10 nurseries. If you've got a member of staff who's really interested in the eco agenda, there are courses that she or he can go on that will benefit them. I mean, they could come to Leaf. We've just developed a whole series of things on that. If you've got a chef that you know is really great and really interested, you can connect him or her up with other courses. Now, if you can't afford the course because you're worried about money, you can connect them with a sort of a learning network, and eventually you can find a way of being able to fund that. And also, people are often willing to contribute to the funding themselves. So my staff who are doing the level 5 foundation degree, the first group did it free because I wanted to test it on them. So we call them pioneers. But from now on, they're all funding it, but I'm giving them time out to do it. I'm also providing the training for them to do it. But that's not the point. The point is that you can be creative about how you offer these things. Okay, if you
just one thing about creativity, there's an interesting couple of comments, thank you, June, that have come in. And in terms of the recruitment, Keely has suggested that they've been more flexible about what their recruitment is. So they've had full-time roles, but they've made them job shares, example. Now, job shares are challenging because you've got to get 2 people and it's got to gel and you've got to train twice as many people. But I think it's an interesting way of being flexible. So staff member doing 3 days instead of 5 and another doing 2, sharing some key children, a good combination. They are an effective way of taking things forward. And also on the turnover thing, there was an interesting comment from Sheila, and it's from the other side of the coin. There are term time preschool with very mature staff. So, and that often is the case, that there's very low turnover, but their concern is now potential retirement. And I picked up from a local authority colleague I was speaking with, not in London, last week, in terms of the recruitment or the retention issue, what happened, and your point about how people felt unsafe staying open during last year. She said in their area, lots of people who were close to retirement age elected to retire, and others felt really concerned from their employers that they had been put at risk. There was a lot of anxiety around, and that was really testing people's willingness to stay in the sector last year.
I would agree, and we saw that writ large, I think, and some people, I mean, you know, let's be frank, some people were very, very good with the staff and some people were not. They didn't think through, and they didn't consider their staff, and they didn't put them, you know, front and face in, you know, in terms of their needs. And so, you know, payback is loyalty and commitment. And yeah, we did have 1 staff retire, rather sadly, actually, because I would have loved to have given her a really great party. But we still will some way. But also what we're seeing too, and I think that's one of your comments above, is flexibility. More and more people want to be able to work part-time, to be able to work around their children, to be able to work around their caring responsibilities. We're seeing more and more staff in London with responsibilities for older parents, not necessarily for children. I don't know, Michelle, what do you think? Especially around the whole apprentice thing, you know, and the succession plan.
For me, I definitely agree with exactly what you're saying, and the turnaround of staff we're seeing. I have 5 cohorts of apprentices, and they range from the 16 fresh out of school right up to the mature student. So for me, it's about looking at the older, let's say the more mature staff members. They also want to learn, and I think it's about being creative and revamping that, so they don't see it as we're putting them at risk, but actually giving them a new step and a new challenge and a new way to change what they were doing in a safer format, whether it be that maybe they're not on the floor with the children, but they may want to train to be a chef, or maybe there's a different avenue for them, and it's directing them in different ways that they still feel secure and respected by the company, but they're able to take that next step.
And that's about the communication reference earlier on, wasn't it? In terms of lack of communication was cited by some people as something that they felt was their reason for leaving their particular employer. And so having those conversations with people, particularly as in many situations, we are very small staff teams.
Yeah, exactly.
So it should encourage it. Just on the apprenticeship thing, we just for those who weren't able to join us a couple of Fridays ago, we did a Business Connect session on the value of apprentices. And if people would like it, we can make those slides available and we will run other sessions. Michelle, is it your experience? We've certainly found as the Alliance that actually the caliber of people coming forward for apprentices has improved over the last year. Now, whether that's a direct reflection of COVID in some unusual way, but certainly we've had a lot more interest in taking out apprentices, and they have been better calibers, and they've turned up for the interviews, which has always been one of the issues in the past.
I agree.
Right.
Definitely, we've had so much interest that we are looking at putting an extra cohort on just because we've got that much interest. But the caliber, for example, I taught a group of them today, and even the way they're able to articulate themselves is just a step above than what, not to say the others weren't articulate in any way, but we've got a different level where they're seeing what's going on in the world and they do want to make a difference, and a lot of them are coming with that passion. And I think what happened during COVID is a lot of people realize there's more to life, and actually the next generation is where we need to be focusing a lot of our attention, and they want to put that passion into it. So I do believe that's played a big part.
And I also, just on that, I think there is a wave to be surfed here, because one of the interesting things last year with parents spending a lot more time with their children, particularly in the first lockdown, they realized how difficult and how important the work done by the nursery where they normally send their child is.
Yeah.
And we really went up in lots of people's expectations in terms of that status, the notion of professionalism. And I hope that is now feeding into interest in people wanting to take on roles in the profession. And it's our duty and responsibility to be welcoming to that and to maintain that momentum and give them opportunities. Just to comment,
the mindset that we just play all day with children is definitely gone out of a lot of people's heads.
Yep, great. Just a comment from Sheila. Their excellent manager was highly conscientious with COVID rules, and staff said that made them feel safe. And that's essentially what we need to ensure that we maintain, Sheila, because it's now going to get even more complicated with the whole removals from today.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Do you want to just bang through a few more of these slides?
Yes, thank you. Here we go.
So again, it's a question of, in a way, finding experience and opportunities for people. But one of the things that's really worked well for us is coaching, and the notion of how you coach people along the way, and that coaching conversation. And it doesn't feel like training, but it actually feels like very great support and making people feel safe. Also, if you can, just up the ante on what you can do to support people regarding maternity and paternity leave, a bit of fourth year plus. If your partner and you are there for the baby's first year, you can share up to 37 weeks paid parental leave. That could be possible. I'm not saying it is special leave. It's just thinking things through a little bit more. Michael, do you want to just?
Yep.
Now for us, of course, we run, as you know, in areas of high levels of deprivation. And our theory of change really is that you need affordability, accessibility, and quality. And for us, quality is all about pedagogy. It's all about pedagogical leadership. It's all about training and supporting staff. And it takes me back to my earlier point about the importance of how much training can you give people. Every time we do a review, and actually when we did some reviews with not just in our sector, but across other sectors, training and opportunities for development comes out time and time again. And I know that could feel like overwhelming to some of you, but I think sometimes what you're looking for is big fancy training, but actually small pieces of training are just as important. Action research is important. Letting one of your staff go to visit another nursery is important. Attending a conference. I mean, the one thing we've learned now is that you can do more online and on Zoom that might be more accessible. And then for us at Leaf, we have to have a pedagogy. We've always had this pedagogy, which is always shifting and developing and deepening, because it's a social pedagogy, and that's what social pedagogies mean. It means you're moving and developing with the times and what the needs of the children are, but these strands are consistent. They don't change. It's within those strands that the little strands underneath sometimes cross over differently, or we do something extra. But this is driven by staff, interested staff, staff who comment on things, staff who observe things. So it's really about giving as many possibilities to your staff to think about how they extend their own learning and their own development. And as I say, if they're interested in gardening, they're interested in cooking, they're interested in fashion, they're interested in anything at all, we can build that into a day in the nursery, and that's that expense the children. Yeah.
I was just going to say, what you've described there is, as early as practitioners, we go where the children's interests lie, don't we? Yeah. So why we should do exactly the same with our practitioners. Michelle, can I invite you to just make a reflection back on the question Keely has said there about anxiety on the part of apprentices, when their anxieties be a barrier. We've told by assessors they're feeling anxious to enter, but once they're through the door and welcome, they're made to feel part of the team, they relax. Oh no, don't say we have a Wi-Fi problem.
No. Michelle, come back.
It was going to be hugely profound. Michelle, can I invite you to leave and come back?
She's back.
She's back.
She's back. We're good.
You're good to go. There we go. You just had a blip in the matrix there.
One of the key things that I do with my cohorts actually is, from the moment they join us, I'm very much a part of their journey in making sure that in their setting they have a coach, and that's an on-site coach that works with them in their classroom. I talk to them through with their provider, where you do enrichment sessions that consolidates what they've learned and put it into practice into their settings. So we make sure that every element they're respected and they're understood. I work with the managers and I work with the coaches directly, looking at specialist skills to be able to support the apprentices, that make them feel that their voice is not just what we often hear of apprentices. They're never going to listen to me, I'm just an apprentice. But what I really push with them is, actually, you've got the freshest eyes, your voice is the most important. Absolutely. When you walk into that room, a lot of staff are not going to see the things that you will see, and it's just about letting them know the importance of them and really building on that confidence, so that they start to see themselves as the teachers of tomorrow. Absolutely. To me, Absolutely. All my apprentices are called my apprentice caterpillars, because when they leave they become butterflies, because I know they can do it.
And the important thing, it's the mind shift of apprentices. They are employees who have a learning program attached to their employment. It is not that they're students, and that is then fed through the team, through the managerial. It's the whole staff that makes a successful apprentice journey. Elaine, being valued is key, which ties into all of what you're stating. I think most of us at the base level in nurseries do this well. However, the wider perception of how we are viewed by the wider community, local schools and local authorities and local central government is far less favourable.
Oh, yes.
Whatever people feel about specific government policies, anything marketed as free isn't given much value. Yet early years deliver so-called free quality childcare all day. How can we expect our staff to value themselves when policy doesn't want to match investment for government and local authorities? June, I will give you 30 seconds on funding, because then I'll bring it back.
That's it, 30 seconds on funding. I mean, what can we say? It's insufficient, it's never been enough, and I never fixate on it, and I never use the word free ever, because it's not free, it's subsidized. I think if we get fixated on the DFE and local authorities and our value is judged by them, we'll be depressed. I think we have to step away from that and actually connect with what I call learning groups. And maybe in London we could do that a bit better. You know, I think one of the advantages of LEAF is that we are a bigger group and we've grown, and that actually within that we've got all sorts of relationships and friendships and networks. But I guess if you're on your own outside, it can feel quite an isolated space. But I think there's something about you building a bridge in and us building a bridge out too. And maybe that's something Michael and his team can do as part of this London network.
You built me up beautifully there. The whole of this process is about empowerment. The way we've structured the program, it is not us being able to fix things, whether it's funding rates or whether it's the skill set that managers or childminders feel as though they have. What we can do is facilitate and support the development of those skills across the piece. And I think the point you made earlier on in terms of the technology and the cultural shift we've had in a year of people's engagement around online learning, it is a huge potential to spin off many of these sessions we've done. We've done it already with the apprenticeship session and the health check for business for childminders. Those cohorts are forming themselves into a network where they've continued the conversations outside of us. We've been able to do them at early times in the morning, at lunchtime sessions, as well as evening. So we've been able to be creative, but the momentum has to come from within the sector itself, because I think you're right. There can be support from local authorities. There can be lip service and rhetoric from central government, but it is within our hands to an extent to make the change ourselves. So I think that's one of the key messages we have to take forward as we work through this program and beyond, because although it's only funded until March of next year, there is part of the work we have been charged with is to try and secure ways in which sustainability can take place. And part of that, we have far stronger conversations with potential funders if we can demonstrate that the momentum is there from the bottom up. I can talk a bit more about that as we go on. Anything about Stronger Together, June?
Just on the point in blue here, don't underestimate the power of a party. Don't underestimate the power of getting together. Don't underestimate just going for fish and chips. I mean, it's just, I think we often play down those things, but actually they're quite essential in terms of building positive culture. And that's one of the things we all missed last year, was those kind of connections. So I think that's my main point on that, really, is just that. Yeah.
It is really interesting. Thank you.
So for us, I mean, I think we were very warmed. We were warmed by the.
Are you right there? What are you doing?
I got a husband who's just come in to annoy me when I'm in the middle of something. Gosh, I haven't. Anyway, so one of the things that warmed us during the lockdown was people's willingness to go above and beyond, you know, to do extra stuff. We were really both sort of surprised and disappointed really by the state of the situation for so many children who ended up, you know, in a really depressing sort of home life with very anxious parents, insufficient funding, food poverty, all sorts of things that went on. And one of the things that staff stepped up to was to develop things like food banks, to do all sorts of interesting activities that really, I think, made them feel good, made the children feel good, but also engaged them. And I think there's quite a lot that you can do in terms of supporting a charity or supporting a campaign or supporting something important, you know, that makes you stand outside of yourself sometimes. And I think a lot of people in the early years are very, very, very soft like that, very warm about other people's needs. And I think it's about doing more like that, but then telling the story. We're not good at telling our stories. Not at all good at telling our stories. And I think we should tell our stories much, much more. And these are just our examples. But before that, we did work with, you know, we have partnerships with the charity in Kenya because they do something similar to us. And staff themselves are often very keen on things. And so why not support them? Even if it's the local allotment or, you know, we go to the, you know, and one of our strands of pedagogy is multi-generational. Michelle will give you some examples of the sort of things we've done, but just connecting with other people, other communities, elderly services, it doesn't matter, it's whatever is local to you, really opens up your story. And I think takes back to some of, I don't know whether it's Elaine's point in the chat about how people don't recognize the amount of stuff we do. And I always say with the early years is like a community catalyst. You know, we're always there. We know the neighborhood. We've been around a long time quite often, you know, and we're part of that local kind of network, but we don't always share it and sell it. And childminders are a particularly good example of that, actually, out and about and stuff. Absolutely. So, you know, that's really, to me, matters. I don't know, Michelle, if you wanted to
yes, if you got an example or two about the intergenerational. I'm particularly interested in intergenerational experiences.
I think because the placement of a number of our settings, just has to happen anyway, But for myself, working in Stockwell Gardens Nursery, where it's actually a part of a hostel, where we had to find a way to work with the younger generation there, right, alongside our children, and teach them empathy and be able to put stuff together, really made a difference and to be able to do the intergenerational work. And it wasn't just about staying within those walls. In the area of Lambeth, we were able to make links with Brixton Soup Kitchen. We went over to the Age Concern and we taught the children about their communities. It was about really getting us out in the community. So we got that community spirit back to us. So when we had different events, we were able to go into the community and they knew what we did and were able to willing to support that.
And the point back to articulation and telling that story, people who are very interested in that story are Ofsted. When we're talking about issues around cultural capital and the engagement of a setting within its local community and how that benefits the children's outcomes, all of those factors are a very strong story. We can take that on. There's the huge potential in using what is where you are located. The strong point of the Alliance has always been its community basis. And what you're talking about there really makes a reality of that, because it doesn't require a bus journey in those situations.
Not at all.
It's also about recruitment and retention, because people know you and you're part of the footfall and you're around, and quite often that's how people will come and knock at your door and say, I've thought about working in childcare, I don't know, could I possibly? And then you can run a workshop for them, or they might come for an hour or two and stuff. So it's quite interesting the more open you are, the more you attract different kind of people who might be interested in working in the sector, including men in childcare, which again, Michelle, you might just say something about before we move on, especially the apprenticeships with young boys.
Yeah, and that would be because we've got our first ever all-male cohort, and while it's a small cohort, it's such a interesting and vibrant group of young men, all from different walks of life, but hold the passion and such advocates for being more young males being in childcare. And some of the conversations they talk about from their past and how their peers may look at them being in childcare, it's just absolutely fascinating to hear their stories of them saying, why lots of people judge me because I didn't like football, but why is it a problem that I don't like football and I actually like comedy? And being able to hear how they use that eccentricity that they have with the children and change themselves into those things, it's outstanding. And I personally have always worked with males in every one of my teams, and it's been a great dynamic. So I'm a big advocate and definitely moving forward with a lot more men in childcare with my group of cohorts of boys. We're going to be going out there and really flying the flag for more men in childcare.
Excellent. That is,
and that includes going into the schools, Michael, because I'm sure all of our people on this chat here go into schools and colleges and stuff, but do we do it enough? Do we tell the story with, the sort of same level of warmth and engagement that when people talk about their work in the nursery, it's a kind of different, it's a different flavor. The interesting thing about men in childcare was that when we asked the men what actually they encouraged them, is they were really interested in the science of child development and how children learn. And I think often we don't talk about that in a way, and we don't talk about the importance of what we do in regards to that. We often talk about, the perception of caring, and we talk about playing, but people don't realize play is a science. It's a very, very, very detailed science that is wrapped up in 4 very simple letters. So I think we don't tell our story very well either. And so therefore people kind of confirm the stereotype that, it's not really for them, or, it's only about caring and playing, and it's about changing nappies all day long. But I mean, I think we have to pull together and really tell the story of the science behind our work.
Thank you. Just one thing I wanted to add before we take comments from colleagues, back to the information on the slide earlier on in terms of why people stay and communication. I'm not sure if colleagues are aware of an innovation called stay interviews. And this is that articulation about what is it for the 45% who are not thinking of leaving the sector. When you get the slides, colleagues, tomorrow, that blue line underline is a link. it's to the early years leadership website, which is interesting. It has some lot of useful stuff on the early years leadership, but this one takes you specifically to information about stay interviews. And what they are is sort of taking it upstream from exit interviews. Exit interviews are when people have gone and you're finding out why they left you. A stay interview is higher up the process in terms of an opportunity to have an open discussion with staff members, and it needs to be candid and honest, inviting them to talk about the role, parts of the job that keep them in your setting. What do they enjoy? The reasons why they stay with you, the parts of the role they enjoy the most, and their motives to remain. It does require a trusting relationship to exist between the interviewer and the interviewee. But I think if you put it as part of your appraisal processes or your supervision processes, it becomes part of the norm. And you're not just doing it on you can do surveys or questionnaires if you wish, but these are things that sometimes are best done in a discussion on a one-to-one basis, just to allow people's thoughts to evolve, because they might just not engage with it if it's just on a question. And it also helps you to identify what makes your employees feel disengaged. So you can accentuate the positive, but it's also an opportunity in that safe environment to talk about the things that are making them less engaged, or to move to an alternative role in another setting, etc. There are ways in which these can be constructive to find both the good and the ill. All of which it's not rocket science, all of which comes down to good communication between employers and employee staff. And isn't it better to do it before they walk out of the door? The potential to actually give consideration to what might make them stay, notwithstanding terms and conditions, is the rider we've put on every statement we've said here, is the possibility to actually take things and make people stay within you and grow with you. If anybody's done stay interviews, I'll be interested in them, because we've introduced them at the Alliance, but they're not fully embedded yet, and it is something which takes a lot of time to introduce, I think. Right. Look, conscious of the time, and it's still incredibly hot. I don't intend to artificially extend the conversations if people feel as though we've reached our natural course. Whilst people have an opportunity to type into the chat any reflections they have or any last comments they want to make, I thought I'd take the opportunity to just give you an update on what's coming in the remainder of July on the Strong Early Years London programme, the Business Connect sessions, which are similar in delivery but have a smaller number of people to allow for greater levels of networking and communication. The next one is tomorrow. Is it tomorrow? Yes, Tuesday the 20th. It's a lunchtime lunch and learn session. We don't provide the lunch, I'm afraid. That's just an invitation for you to eat while you're chatting. When you get the slides tomorrow, that is a live link that will take you to the registration for that. And there is also a breakfast session. We were on Thursday around staff well-being. And we've run those breakfast sessions between 7:45 and 8:45 in the morning. We did wonder whether that would be off-putting or a problem for people to engage. They've been hugely well attended. People have been quite honest that they're listening in while they're getting the children ready to go to school, or they're munching their toast. But it is the time at which people are engaged before the children come in and you're in ratio, or you're having to deal with the day. The opportunity to actually just reflect on your managerial practices and how you support your staff may be something that you enjoy doing on Thursday. I think, yes, that's me done. Whilst, as I say, while I witter on for a second, in case people want to make any final comments, other than to say my thanks to June and to Michelle for their contributions today. Leaf always demonstrates itself as a hugely dynamic organization, but as both have said, it's the thinking about it. It's not the size of the organization. Yes, there are certain elements that can benefit from that you have a wider staff team to draw from. It's around engaging people's enthusiasm, meeting them where they are, and finding out what makes them constructive and engaged members of your team, and responding to that accordingly, because it's in our own interest to make sure we don't have to recruit because we retrain and retain and retrain and develop. Think of how much money it costs you in time and effort to recruit somebody who leaves. Isn't it better to actually invest that money in making them stay and progress them? Okay. It looks like people's typing fingers have melted along with the rest of them. So on that situation, then I will say thank you to everybody. My thanks again to June and Michelle. And as I say, for people to enjoy this at their leisure, the recording of this session will be available on the Alliance's YouTube site, hopefully by close of business tomorrow evening. And we will send round both the slides from today's session, but also the booklet from which the Leaf slides were presented. June and Michelle have very kindly allowed that in its entirety to be circulated as well. There's lots of fascinating reading in there, and hopefully it will give you lots of ideas. Enjoy the rest of your Monday evening. Stay warm, and I hope you get a good night's sleep on what's meant to be a very muggy night. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle.
No
Thank you,
worries.
Michelle. Bye-bye.